Mikomwood, legendary and mysterious place of great wonder, was the home of the madman Moicham, a character so unimportant to this story that he will in fact never be mentioned again. Our story in the magnificent lands of Mikomwood starts with the character this story is about. A character so famed you will in fact never hear his name be spoken. The sun was shining on our hero's bald head, only his magnificent Mikomstache was made of the human-produced exterior decorating material called hair. The trees, oh so shiny, were waving slowly in the wind, waiting expectantly since the scene below them would indeed prove to be an excellent spectacle to observe. It is in this small glade we find our hero and companion, and also his fearsome foe. His foe let out a battle cry, all the trees were shaking in expectant eroticism. The gorilla with 5 heads let out a second roar that was greatly exaggerated, and it rolled over the lands of Mikomwood. As the battle started, it is my narrative duty and delight to offer you, the listener, a flashback of previous events. A long time ago, in a land far, far away. Okay, let's skip this bit. And so the dragon turned into a 5-headed gorilla, and our hero observed the arcaneth rituale that had just been performed on the plateau below him by the mad cow priests of Harim. The gorilla, still chained to the rocky foundation of a long-destroyed temple, no doubt by excessive use of the arcaneth rituale, now began to pull on his chains. The mad cow priests began to chant a terrible, chant. Now they raised their eyes, all 5 of them, to the sky as well as their hands. Many as their eyes were, they did not notice the fact that the foundation of the plateau was not as solid as they thought. Slowly, as the gorilla roaringly pulled on his many chains, the rocks on which the plateau was resting began to crumble. Our hero watched with an amused sense of boredom as the plateau started sliding off the rocks on which the ancient formation had previously been resting. Now, as the cow priests became aware their fucked up chanting wasn't going to rescue them this time, the gorilla broke free of his chains and started swinging his large arms around him, occasionally sweeping off a cow priest with a slow yet unstoppable blow, making them wish they had performed the arcaneth rusculus instead, giving them wings. Naturally, as is known to all people of Mikomwood, cows as well as pigs do not fly, and they fell to a splashy death on the rocks below. Meanwhile, on another side of the mountain ridge, a travelling cook observed the events below, and then invented the Hamish burger, a dish now native to the lands of Mikomwood that consists of 2 pieces of Mikom bread holding in between them some Mikom salad and the core ingredient of splashed mad cow priest. The hero now stood up. He watched as the large plateau started sliding down the hill with a boringly slow speed. On the plateau itself, the remaining mad cow priests, as well as the gorilla, who had now realized there were a lot better places to be summoned into existence, started holding on to the moving dish-shaped rock for their lives. Our hero jumped onto his large broadsword with his feet and started sliding down on the rocky hill, sparks coming off both sides of the sword. His chase of the plateau had started and quickly came to an end as well, as he realized that he was going way too fast. He crashed into the sliding plateau with a rain of sparks, dust, and small rock fragments. Meanwhile, on another one of the many ridges of the mountain, a travelling sports teacher, who conveniently happened to be in the area, observed our hero as he skied down the rocky hill. Had he been a more creative person, he probably would have invented some new sport. Alas, the man, like all teachers, lacked a sense of originality and was therefore unable to think of anything creative. Instead, he just sat and watched in amazement and occasionally uttering words like, "Oh," and "Ah." Down at what was now a pile of rubble and a plateau broken in half, the surviving mad cow priest, fell over the edge of the broken plateau and splashed on the rocks further below. Actually, forget I said anything about surviving mad cow priests. Our hero, on the other hand, brushed off some dust and splinters of his battle blouse and then looked at where the gorilla had been chained to the plateau. There was nothing there but a pile of chains. He looked around, he smelled the air, he let out a fart, and then set out in the direction he thought the gorilla had gone. After 2 weeks of masterful trekking, our hero passed through a village with some mysterious gorilla foot-shaped tracks in the mud. He asked a friendly villager if he had seen a large gorilla pass through the village recently, as he pointed out the tracks. The villager, who looked bruised and like he'd been thrown at the town hall from quite a distance away by, say, a giant gorilla, didn't respond well, but instead muttered to himself and continued down the street. Our hero, now knowing that he was on the right track, picked up the pace and jumped into his magnificent Ford Cortina. His brave steed. In a day's time, our fantastically brave and handsome hero had tracked down the gorilla to a small open field in the middle of the forest, as you may remember from the start of this story. So, here we are. Hero versus five-headed gorilla. This is proving to be the battle of the ages. Or well, this part of Mikomwood anyway. This week. There was a great battle between the trolls of Yar and Begirian dwarves earlier that week that scores pretty high as well. The gorilla angry at the fact nobody loved him and the fact that he'd been summoned into this world for apparently no reason whatsoever. And the hero simply resolute and firm in his stance, for he knew his duty was to slay this abomination. The hero let out his fearsome battle cry, "For Mikomwood!" and the two fighting bodies collided. The gorilla swinging his arms that the hero skillfully avoided the random giant pieces of hairy arm flying around him, cutting with his sword in all the conveniently vulnerable places at the sword height that were exposed in the gorilla's hairy body. The gorilla got one swing right, though, and the hero flew and hit a tree with excellent aerodynamic force. The tree sighed with pleasure. Our hero stood up with the speed of a really slow lightning bolt and rushed at the monster, with his sword ready to make the final thrust into the creature's heart. But then the writer suddenly completely ran out of ideas. The characters stood still for a minute, occasionally kicking a small innocent pebble out of the way, the trees still pleasuring themselves. Some birds flew overhead. A micro-hurricane appeared out of thin air and gave a worm a headache. 3 small rabbits were briefly visible in the shrubbery, but quickly disappeared again. Then it occurred to the writer. He once again started scribbling words on the parchment. Our hero poked out a pebble from between his toes and then raised his magnificent sword. There was a glint in his eye. He quickly rubbed it out and then made a surprise charge at the first of the 5 heads. He cut it up with the noise you generally get when you're finishing a milkum shake. The gorilla, though 1/5 less surprised than he would have been, raised his remaining 4 heads. Angry as a tiger, or gorilla if you will, he set out after the hero. Both warriors were chasing each other in circles for a good 2 minutes. Our hero made a full stop while ducking as the gorilla ran over his head, and then the hero jumped on his back. While repeatedly stabbing the gorilla in the back, it let out its final roar. Ouch. Then the gorilla fell to the ground in a ragdollish fashion, having appeared to have lost most of its weight. The hero stood next to it, and the gorilla started to glow, and the hero was surrounded by a magnificent yellow glow which surrounded him, swept him, and then died out with a less than impressive poof. And like this we must conclude this tale from the magnificently mysterious lands of Mikomwood. Our hero has things to do after all, and I would imagine you have as well. So now we say goodbye to Mikomwood and its magnificent trees, sweeping hills, staggering mountains, and splashy cow priests. The end.